Half a day students, I am Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. You all have been through a year of big changes. We've had to adapt and make big changes to keep our families and our island safe. But with change comes opportunity and a chance to try new things like PBS University. While Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio and I will continue to do our part to keep our island safe, you students have a part to play as well. Your part is to keep learning and to keep up with your lessons. That's why I am happy to see you here ready to learn with PBS University. PBS University is a way to bring a continuous educational curriculum to you while you stay safe at home during this time. To help you keep up with your studies, we asked our friends at PBS Guam and the Guam Department of Education to put together this episode. Thank you for doing your part and have a great lesson.
Humanities Guåhan, an independent nonprofit organization affiliated with the National Endowment for the Humanities, is dedicated to promoting public humanities programming for the people of Guam and providing foundational support and educational resources for our island community. For more information about Humanities Guåhan, visit www.humanitiesguahan.org. The following webinar series is part of a project presented by Humanities Guåhan entitled Unincorporated, Voting, Voices, and Visions Para Guåhan. This project explores Chamorro stories, experiences, and perspectives on civic engagement in relation to voting rights, democracy, political status, and Chamorro self-determination. Unincorporated consisted of the 5-part webinar series that took place from January through May 2021 and covered topics on the origins of Chamorro self-determination, the work of the Commission on Decolonization, the relationship between art and decolonization, and the role of the U.S. legal system as it relates to Guam's political status. The project culminated with the launch of an online and printed magazine distributed throughout the community, which consists of essays, creative reflections, and artwork exploring issues around Guåhan's political status and decolonization through the perspectives and historical and political experiences of the Chamorro people of Guåhan.
Half a day and welcome. As many of you know, I'm Kimberlee Kihleng from Humanities Guåhan. We are very excited to bring you this morning's webinar, Words and Reflections from the Commission on Decolonization, with Executive Director Melvin Won Pat-Borja in conversation with Selina Onedera-Salas, a legislative policy analyst and community advocate. We also have a special address by Megahaga Lou Leon Guerrero, the chairperson of the Commission on Decolonization. So thank you for joining us. This webinar is the second in a 5-part series for the project Unincorporated, Voting, Voices, and Visions Para Guåhan, which will also include a digital magazine to launch this April. Unincorporated explores Chamorro stories, experiences, and voices in relation to voting rights, democracy, decolonization, and self-determination. Humanities Guåhan received a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in partnership with the Federation of State Humanities Councils to produce this project as part of the nationwide initiative, Why It Matters, Civic and Electoral Participation. We see ourselves as the convener, connector, and catalyst for the project as we explore why civic engagement matters through an examination of the political history of Guåhan and the histories, experiences, and diverse perspectives of the island's indigenous people. Humanities Guåhan is humbled and honored by the opportunity to bring this important project to our island community. I want to thank Melvin and Natasha Suba, the program coordinator at the Commission on Decolonization, for this special program partnership. Natasha worked closely and enthusiastically with Nicole joining us from Humanities Guåhan to plan and prepare for this webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Megahagan Guåhan, Lou Leon Guerrero.
I just wanted to say half a day Todu Samju, and I'm just so grateful, Kim, for the Humanities Council's partnership and with other people for hosting this, I think, very important webinar series and furthering the discussion on civic engagement in relation to national voting rights, democracy, decolonization, self-determination, and Guam's political status. For over 500 years after Guam's first contact with foreigners, our path has been driven by colonization. And today, our people, our culture, and even our history continue to be shaped by the words and actions of world powers. However, we must remember that Guam has never stood idly by. In 1949, the Guam Congress walked out of session to protest their lack of power after efforts to subpoena an American civilian regarding a violation of a prohibition against Americans owning local businesses was thwarted by Naval Governor Charles Allen Palmer. Frustrated and angered by the lack of respect, they refused to return, and Governor Palmer dismissed them from their positions. This brave act of civil disobedience brought widespread national attention to the long-standing political struggle of our people. Guam leaders, among them Antonio B. Wompat and Francisco B. Leon Guerrero, stood before Congress and sitting presidents to demand that the people of Guam be treated fairly and equally. Through their efforts, the Guam Organic Act of 1950 was passed, granting U.S. citizenship to our people and establishing our status as an unincorporated territory. Despite this monumental shift in recognition for our people, we must remember that the Organic Act was passed and implemented without the express will and consent of our people, leaving our core issues of political status and self-determination issues unresolved. While the Organic Act bestowed some measures of self-governance to Guam, it would take another 20 years for us to elect our own governor. And in 1972, we were able to elect a delegate to the House of Representatives, one with no voting privileges and a very limited voice. We must acknowledge that our present political status does not meet our needs. As an unincorporated territory, we are limited in our ability to negotiate meaningful partnerships with our regional neighbors, and we lack the full authority to dictate how our land, our skies, and our waters are to be used. And though national voting rights would increase Guam's level of autonomy and self-government and would allow us to vote for president, it still does not address the fundamental denial of our right to self-determination. As discussions increase regarding Guam's ability to vote in national elections, we must acknowledge that this is not a substitute for decolonization or for self-determination, a very fundamental basic human right that has been denied to us for too long. The Biden-Harris administration has acknowledged that now is the time for the United States to rectify the social injustices of the past, whose effects continue to shape our present and guide our future. And now is the time to act. My administration has not been silent in our intent to press forward in Guam's quest for decolonization. Today, I reaffirm this commitment. We ourselves alone must control the will of our destiny. Once again, thank you, Kim, to the Humanities Council, Guåhan, for organizing this event. And I am excited for the conversations and discussions that will come about, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. Suzu Usmasi.
Suzu Usmasi, Governor, thank you so much for being here and for giving such an important address. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Selina once again, as I did 3 weeks ago. I have been privileged to know Selina for the past 15 years. Selina served on the Humanities Guåhan board. She is our current Grant Review Committee chairwoman. She's a colleague as well as a friend. Selina, as I initially mentioned, is a legislative policy analyst and community advocate, currently working in the office of Senator Clint Rigel. She's actively involved in community nonprofit organizations that seek to protect, perpetuate, and promote the preservation of CHamoru cultural values. Selina earned a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Texas at San Antonio and immediately returned home to continue her career in public service. Selina also chaired the Literary Arts Committee for the 2016 Festival of Pacific Arts held in Guåhan. Thank you so much again, Selina, for your partnership in presenting Unincorporated.
Suzuos Maase Kim, thank you very much for that introduction. It is now, I do want to thank everyone for their participation today. And before we continue our conversation, I just want to go over some housekeeping rules with our participants. And not rules, but just some guidance as to how we're going to facilitate. And so Melvin will be giving us his presentation, which we've broken down into, I think, 3 segments. And between each segment, I will be posing or fielding questions from our participants. And this includes our participants on the Facebook feed. Our Humanities Guåhan team will be submitting your questions for you to me. And I'm hoping that we can have enough time to address everyone's questions and for Melvin to answer. So without further ado, just to explain the Commission on Decolonization mission. The Commission on Decolonization was established by the 24th Guam Legislature in 1997 to enhance the efforts of the Commission on Self-Determination. Its purpose is to educate the people of Guam on the various political status options available. Since then, the Commission and each respective task force have conducted educational and outreach programs, including meetings, rallies, and seminars in efforts to inform the public about the decolonization process and 3 status options: free association, independence, and statehood. It is now my privilege to introduce my dear friend, Melvin Won Pat-Borja. He is the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization, the President of the Department of CHamoru Affairs, and Acting Director of the Guam Public Library System. Prior to his appointment, he served as an educator in the public school system for over a decade, most recently with Southern High School. Melvin holds a BEd in secondary education and a master's in Pacific Island Studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Melvin, thank you very much for sharing this space and taking the time to have this conversation with us today. It is my honor and privilege. Hutunahau de Pagu I Tarehamu. Sizuos Maase.
Sizuos Maase. Hafide Toda Samzu, Hafide Magahaga, Kim, and the staff and crew at Humanities Guåhan, and all of you joining us online. Thank you for being here to extend this conversation. We're going to start. I need to first thank Magahaga for framing this conversation, the context of this conversation with some really important milestones in our history. A lot of which led to where we are now. I would like to speak a little bit about how we got here and what, not so much, there was a lot of this conversation really was had last webinar with Dr. Underwood, and a lot of that history was laid out very thoroughly. But I did want to highlight the Commonwealth Era. So the Commonwealth Era was, and this is a very critical part too, because it's relevant in our community conversations. A lot of people still wonder whatever happened to Commonwealth, or why isn't Commonwealth going to be on a ballot? And the short answer really is that it is. Free association really would be a Commonwealth option. but I think more importantly, we are here because of what transpired during the Commonwealth push. We moved from the Commonwealth period, which basically ended with our legislation dying in committee. And I think that the lesson that we learned in that negotiation, if you want to call it that, was that we would always hit our heads upon a glass ceiling, so long as we are within an oppressive set of parameters. And we realized that though it seemed that we would have support for our decolonization or for our self-determination, that there were always going to be limits. And during that process is also a part of, as we spoke in the last webinar, Dr. Underwood talked about the OPIR effort. During that time, this was really the beginning of our engagement with the UN. And as Dr. Underwood stated, this was all new to them at that time. They had never heard of the UN. They'd never heard of these committees on decolonization and these concepts and charters and resolutions. And so it really opened up a new avenue. And there still remains criticism locally. You know, what does the UN have to do with any of this? Like, why are we dealing with the UN? This is a decision for Congress to make or for the president to make. Or as the United States federal government says, this is a domestic issue. However, we have recognized that dealing solely through domestic policy and federal negotiations, we would always hit our head on the ceiling. We would never really break through. And we saw that with the Commonwealth Draft Act ending in committee. I mean, it never even hit the floor. It was never even voted on. And so during that time during that negotiation, one of the major stumbling blocks was the federalized control over immigration and mutual consent. And so Guam wanted control of our immigration. The federal government did not want to negotiate that point. They wanted control of it. We wanted mutual consent. Mutual consent over affairs dealing with how the military would operate on Guam, what they could and couldn't do. And that was really the big piece, right? If you remember in Dr. Underwood's conversation, the sentiment at that time was that US citizenship would stop the unfair and arbitrary treatment of our people, especially regarding land. And so we understood that even on a governmental level, there had to be an address of this inequity of our relationship. And what we found is that was not going to happen. You know, Governor Addo became famous, or maybe I guess infamous in some circles, for saying that he would not negotiate on mutual consent, that it was not within his authority to do so because it was decided on by the people through a plebiscite. And then he turned around and said that without mutual consent, my people can never truly be empowered, which I think was a really bold statement, you know, to not negotiate on these terms, that was really, you know, that was at the core of what we were after. And so after that, all of that transpired, Senator Hope Alvarez Cristobal authored PL 23147, which dissolved the Commission on Self-Determination and created the Commission on Decolonization. Now you'll notice that even the language shifts, right? So we go from self-determination into decolonization, recognizing that decolonization is consistent with the language of the UN, the language of the international community. And even in this law, you'll notice these parallel words running that reflect each other. And so even in the question of why these statuses, why these choices, why these three options, the simple answer is that these are the three internationally recognized options for political status that would relieve a non-self-governing territory from colonial rule. And so it's very clear and very simple, and it doesn't come from nowhere. This is a process, an old process that a lot of countries have gone through. You know, being mindful that Guam is one of the last 17 non-self-governing territories of the world.
While we're waiting while we're accepting questions too, I actually had a question myself. I wanted to hear what you think about, or is it possible to achieve, maybe this might be jumping ahead, but voting rights without changing our status?
Is it possible to achieve national voting rights
National
without
voting
changing our
rights,
status?
yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think, and I guess it is kind of jumping ahead, but
Yeah.
why not? Let's do it.
Well, we can hold on to that, but I just wanted to kind of put
Well,
that out there.
we don't have to go into the meat of it, but I would say yes, absolutely, because national voting rights would be seen as a political status improvement, right? And that's really, I think that's a thing that we have to recognize, is that political status improvements are great. You know, I don't think that anybody objects to improving a status, but there's a difference between improving the status and resolving the issue of self-determination, the denial of self-determination. That's
quo.
the short answer. Right, status quo. And to keep in mind that we've also gone down that path, right? That at one point there was a plebiscite where we chose there was an option that was status quo with improvements, which is really funny too, you know, because they didn't say what the improvements would be, right? It's just status quo with improvements. They can independent, statehood, status quo with improvements. And most of us interpret improvements as we're gonna get more money. Or maybe they're gonna make our non-voting delegate vote. Or maybe they're gonna give us another non-voting delegate, but in the Senate. Or maybe, I mean, the list goes on, right? We can kind of do this all day. But all of these things together. Maybe it's electoral college votes. Oh, that's a nice one. That's a good hot button one, right? That looks really nice on the media, in national media, in international media, that looks fantastic. Electoral college votes. Now they can vote for president. We're gonna cross that one off the list of things that Samoros can complain about. But it doesn't resolve the core issue. You know, we can, even if we have an opportunity, what if we put a person from Guam gets elected as president, right? Some miracle, we run the table on the electoral college vote. This still doesn't change the core issue.
Yeah. But it's a lot. I mean, that's a lot to consider. A lot of opportunities out there, but status quo. So I just we did get a question come in from Mr. Robert Cruz. He's asking, has Guam tried to collaborate with the other non-self-governing territories, perhaps to educate each other on their options?
Deciding the options, or on an option together?
It sounds more, Mr. Cruz wants to know perhaps to educate each other on their options. Maybe just in general too, Mel.
Well,
what have we done?
We do communicate with our neighbors in the CNMI about political status, but I think the reality is that unfortunately for us, we are one people. We're an island chain like Hawaii, right? I mean, we're a chain of islands with the same culture, ethnicity. You know, we were together, but politically now, through our own choosing, politically we are divided. You know, and the reality is that, you know, war came between us, and, you know, political power came between us, and the CNMI went one way and we went another.
These webinars can be accessed on Humanities Guåhan's Facebook page. To view the online magazine associated with Unincorporated Voting, Voices, and Visions Para Guåhan, visit humanitiesguåhan.org/unincorporated.
Hafa students, I'm Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. For more than a year now, you all have continued to wash your hands and watch your distance from others, and you've done a really great job wearing your masks. We know your parents and guardians have helped you to make these changes to keep yourself and your community safe. As Governor Leon Guerrero said, we are happy you are here. We want you to continue to learn and sharpen your skills with the help of PBS University. This program is the result of a collaborative effort. We couldn't do it alone. I'd like to thank the teachers and support staff of the Guam Department of Education and PBS Guam for their work and their commitment to our students. I'd also like to thank you students for participating at home. To your parents, I'd like to thank you for taking an active role in your child's education. We are all eager to return to a time when all of us can share and study together in person. Until then, we hope you learned something new from this PBS University instruction.